Okay.
Great, thanks. So Philip, say it again. Let's go through it again.
All right. As you're going to introduce yourselves, if you could say your name and your church with the location, because probably First Presbyterian Church might be repeated a few times here. And then if you could say, if you wanted to share one thing with a visitor in one sentence about your church, what would it be? And you can't say we are friendly, but you only have one sentence. So I've already narrowed it down, the parameters for you. Anyway, so that would be great if we wanted to start that way.
Good. Okay, so let's start with Binghamton United, those folks there.
Sally Hunt, Binghamton United. I guess I'd like people to realize that we truly are a diverse population, age-wise, sex-wise, just across the board. We're a very diverse, interesting congregation.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm Scott Kindig, and I would say that music is very important to our congregation.
Good. Let's go to the folks in Delhi. Connie or Deb.
I'm Connie Stone. I'm pastor of Delaware County Trinity Covenant Presbyterian, which is 3 churches combined. It's West Delhi, Hamden, and Delancey. And I'm also moderator of the presbytery. The churches, we worship together. So even though we're 3 separate churches, we are one church family. And I guess what I would tell people about these churches is they are very good about caring about people. Very good about caring about people. It's not just that they are friendly, they are good about doing things to take care of people.
Thanks. Deb, you have anything for us?
Deb Fleming. I'm the lay pastor at the Cabin Hill Presbyterian Church. I'm also a member of the West Delhi Presbyterian Church. I'm the clerk of session there. But as lay pastor of Cabin Hill, I would say that the congregation there is spirit-filled and spirit-led.
Thanks.
They're very, they will pick up well, anyway, that was my one sentence. Let's leave it there.
Thanks.
And I will speak for UMD.
Yeah.
And say that this congregation loves lavishly and loves music.
Thanks, Rick. So let's go over to Cortland and hear from those folks there.
Doug Hatch, Marathon, First Presbyterian. My congregation participates more enthusiastically and in more numbers on mission projects than they do in participating in church worship service.
Thanks.
I'm Dave Johnson. I'm pastor at Cortland United and vice moderator of the Presbytery. The Cortland congregation has a strong music program and community service program, which we try to demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ.
Thanks. Great. And Louise, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Louise Lech. I'm a member of the Unadilla Presbyterian Church, and my congregation is a very caring congregation. Not only do we, during joys and concerns, we share joys and concerns of people and things in our everyday lives besides besides what's within our own church family.
Thanks. Peter?
Peter Shea, elder, lay preacher, and also most recently guest moderator at Deposit. And my home church is Otigo, and we're flexible and we really enjoy participatory worship services.
Thank you. Cheryl.
I'm Cheryl Magis, and I am an elder at the Presbyterian Church in Bainbridge. We also worship with the Presbyterian Church in East Guilford. We share a pastor. And I would say our church is very musical, and we're also excellent cooks.
Thanks. Okay, Alice Martin and Deposit.
Hi, I'm Alice from Deposit First Presbyterian Church. We're a very small church, but we hope to grow.
Great, thanks. And Karen from Nichols.
Good morning. My name is Karen Harella. I'm an acting elder at the Nichols Presbyterian Church. I'm also the treasurer and the secretary. I'd have two main things about our congregation is one, the Sunday worship. We have Pastor George Boudin, and he always ties the sermon message into current things in our lives so we can really relate to it. The other thing about our church is our mission of our med shed, which is where we take and reuse medical equipment, durable medical equipment, and we serve a very, very wide community, not just Nichols and not just New York State, because we're right near the border, so we have a lot of in Pennsylvania and many, many counties, and it's a wonderful, very rewarding mission.
Yes, thank you. And Nancy.
Good morning. I am, first of all, my name is Nancy Grodevant, and I am a co-moderator with the First Congregational Church in Walton. So I appreciate you letting me come in and join you today. One of the things that we like for people to know about our church is that we are open and affirming.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. We're glad that you were with us.
Thank you.
So Philip is here. He kind of led us in the way that to introduce yourselves. And just a reminder that Philip is the director of Thriving and Rural Ministry Program at the University of the Ozarks in Clarksville, Arkansas. He's served as in parish ministry since 2002 with congregations in Indiana, Illinois, and Arkansas. Is married to Tasha, and who is a pastor, and they have 2 children. And we're thankful again, Philip, for you being here and leading us through this time.
Thanks. And thanks everybody for the sharing. That was awesome. Really great to be with you guys this Saturday morning. So you get to be my guinea pigs in this conversation. I haven't put together a presentation on visitors specifically before, so this will be great. But I spend a fair amount of my time, as you may have deduced from my job title, thinking about small and rural congregations. So that's going to be my focus, obviously, with us today. I tried to structure some basic core values in here. We're going to stay away from anything that would cost you a lot of money. We're going to stay away from anything that would be broadly labor intensive. I know in a lot of our congregations, we have a few people who have a lot of duties and obligations just to keep the church running. So we want to try and make things as simple as possible, and really focus on some simple things and that as we go along. So I hope this will be a rolling conversation. I'm just going to kind of bring up some things. I'm going to share some resources with you. And then have, I think, we'll see how the end goes. I've got something a little different, I think, for our conclusion. I'm going to be curious if you like it or not. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so that you can see my presentation that I've worked up. And let's see if I can do this. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
All right. So again, listen, if you want to stop or say anything, ask anything, question certainly any of these ideas or thoughts, I encourage you to do it. So we're going to talk about Advent visitors today, which is a big time for all of us, I think, to be expecting some folks in worship that we wouldn't ordinarily see. So we've already done our introduction, so we can skip these slides, and we're going to ground ourselves first. One of the things that I have noticed in the churches that I interact with is there's quite a lot of, I would say, latent fear and anxiety these days in our Presbyterian churches. Many of our congregations are aging. Many of them are smaller than they used to be. And I think that sometimes I'm going to shift so that the sun's not right behind me. How's that? Better?
Better.
So a lot of times this, I think, presents itself in some ways that maybe aren't the most helpful for us as we get into this conversation. I don't think anybody's bad or wrong for having those emotions or feelings, but we've got to, from my observation, we've got to be a little careful about not letting those feelings kind of get into conversations, especially like these around visitors and church growth. So I wanted to spend a few minutes kind of just putting that on the table, naming it, and then kind of talking about how I personally approach this in my work with congregations. So first, what story do we want to tell? So I asked you about that with your congregations just a minute ago. So we want to communicate the correct message, right? Like, you don't want people coming to your church because they think you have great ice cream if you don't serve ice cream. So as we talk about our church and as we communicate to people who already walk in the door, it's important to have just some simplicity around what it is we're trying to say. You've got one or two sentences to kind of communicate some core values to people. Some of you, I think it was pretty clear, have that sentence, like they were fairly polished. So that's great. Anyway, next, this is important. We're not trying to attract people to an institution. I have yet to meet the person who joined a church who said, hey, I joined this church because I really wanted to help them make budget. Right? That's not something that happens, but it's something we talk about a lot. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard people say, well, we need to grow because we can't pay our bills. No, that's not why you need to grow. That's the fear and the anxiety kind of talking a little bit. And so that comes out, right, whether we intend for it to or not, when we get into these conversations. And when we meet new people who have found their way into our church, most people who visit a church aren't visiting because they want to support an institution. They're visiting because they want to encounter Jesus in a community. And they think your community might be the one for them to have that encounter and to walk that path with people who have some similar theological values, some similar life values, some similar stations in life. So, I've written it down here. Let's see if I can. There we go. So we don't want visitors to boost our giving. We don't want to get more young families. That's a nice thing to do. And we don't want people to help maintain our building, right? These are not the reasons that we need to grow, but these are a lot of the things we talk about when we talk about visitors and growth. I'm not aware of a place in scripture that tells us to focus on young families. So that's why I put that there. I know everybody would like that. But again, I think naming young families as kind of this crown jewel is the fear and anxiety kind of talking a little bit. And again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to tell people the story of Jesus. We're trying to show them how that story is reflected in our distinct communities and the church universal. So that's the encounter that we're trying to facilitate, is this story of Jesus, how our faith in Jesus manifests itself in our community and in our worship and in the ways we relate to each other. So anyway, before I go to the next slide, you guys want to push back on any of that? Do you have anything you want to say? Don't want to rush us through anything. All right, then I'm going to go forward. Onward we go. So why do we exist? This is my favorite summary of the church's purpose. You may recognize this from the Book of Order. These are the great ends of the church. This is our job description. I have found, I don't think congregations can be reminded of this often enough. At your session level, in your committees, in your worship services, recontextualizing their work in our theology, which is incredibly rich and incredibly long-standing. We have centuries as Presbyterians and Reformed Christians of trying to do this work of being the church. And we've learned some interesting stuff. And one of the things that we wrote are these 6 great ends. Now, these are from 1910. So they're a bit anachronistic in their language if you're not familiar with them. But one of the things I would say is, as you guys were sharing your sentences, I heard a lot of these reflected in those sentences. When you talked about music, when you talked about your worship services, one of you mentioned the preaching that you hear at your worship services. There it is, right there. One of you mentioned that you have more people showing up for mission than you do for worship. So again, there it is right there. I'm pointing at the screen with my hand, even though you can't see. You know, one of you mentioned the ways in which you love lavishly, right? Several, I think, fit nicely into this shelter, nurture, and spiritual fellowship of the children of God. So I think it's important when we're talking about visitors or we're talking about church growth to constantly be coming back to why it is we exist as a church to begin with. And then identifying the ways in which our church is already doing some of these things, and then ways in which we could maybe think about doing some of them better or spending more time on some of these. So like, I know that it's not exactly earth shattering here to pull up something that's 115 years old almost and be like, do this. But I do think it's important because, like I mentioned, as I have conversations with pastors and congregations, the fear and anxiety pulls us away from our theological heritage and from our understanding of what it means to be church. So kind of constantly going back to that, constantly rerouting ourselves and our purpose in that, I think is important. These are the reasons I think that visitors are looking for churches. These are the things they're seeking. You know, they're seeking a place where they can be nurtured in a very specific way. They're seeking a place where they can worship God, the triune God that we have celebrated for 2,000 years. They're seeking a place that promotes a very specific type of social righteousness. They want to hear the truth in a world where truth just seems like nothing, right? When truth is completely subjective. They want to know, they want a taste of what Jesus promises in the next life, in this one, as we do our little bits to usher in the kingdom of heaven. That's what people are seeking. It's the same thing they have sought for a very long time. And so trying to get back to those roots and really explicitly name those and connect those, I think, for people in their lives is just of fundamental importance to us if we're going to have these types of conversations, and not get into kind of gimmicks. We don't want to promise things that we aren't then going to deliver. And we want to remember that anybody that walks through our doors is a valued, cherished child of God, no matter their socioeconomic status, no matter their age, no matter how many kids they have. None of those things matter to us. So anyway, that's just a little rerouting. I hope you don't find that patronizing or redundant. I wasn't sure, but I just like to get that out there whenever I'm working with congregations. So again, anything you guys want to say or comments or questions or disagreements, anything?
Hey, Philip, Peter Shea.
Hey, Peter.
One thought that came to mind is maybe scrolling these or posting these to church websites or as a entry onto Facebook or even bandit signs. our church proclaims the gospel.
Mhm.
And next week you have a banded sign that says, we shelter and nurture fellowship. And then it becomes I'm dating myself, but a shaving cream commercial along Route 66.
I like it.
I like it.
That's great. Yeah, I'm for it. I am for it. Anything you can do. My wife and I'm still serving in a church, and we're just finishing up a sermon series on the great ends of the church. I think this is the third time in the 11 and a half years we've preached on these. People are probably tired of it, but then we find that they don't remember them. And when I work with commissioned ruling elders, I had them put together a sermon series and a Bible study on it. I think any way that you can get these in front of people, and especially your own congregation, is great. Just remind everybody, like, this is what you love, right? This is why we all go to church. This is why we love it, is because we experience these things. The reason people are so committed to one another. I mean, I don't remember which one of you it was who talked about the sharing of joys and concerns. When I was in Lincoln, Illinois for 8 years, that was a town of about 15,000 surrounded by cornfields. The joys and concerns piece was one of the longest and best parts of that worship service. And people would just stand up and share. And I remember one time we hosted the choir from the local college, and it was not a Christian college, it was secular, but they came and sang for us. And it was great. About 4 of them raised their hands and shared joys and concerns after it got going. I mean, I had no idea that was the part of the service they would resonate, but they felt like in that place and in that moment, they were valued, and their feelings and their worries were valued. And that's really what you're getting at. So yeah, I think that's great. Anything you can do to get them out there in front of people, I'm for it. Other comments, other questions, thoughts?
Bill Dave Johnson from Portland. I've preached on the great ends, but as I'm looking at them now, I think if I were to use them again, I would update the language a little bit. I would soften some of the language, or at least make it more easily to understood by those outside the church.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's old language, right? And so you got to think through how do you get to that core idea in a way that speaks. And so I think, this is not scripture. We can change it, play with it, move them around, whatever you want to do. But I think that's a great idea. If you can think of phrases and words that will play better in your congregation and help people understand it better, or people in your community, let's do it. Anything else you guys want to say about these?
As Connie Stone, as pastors, it's and teaching or ruling elders, it's easy for us to know these because they're in front of us a lot. But when you're sitting in a session meeting or a cabinet meeting, and the other people in that meeting are sitting there thinking about numbers and young families and et cetera, all those things you mentioned before, it is not so easy to convince them that this is what needs to happen, because they aren't thinking like this. They are thinking our church is going to die if we don't get young families. Our church is going to die if we don't have more money, our church, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is wonderful, but it's a tremendous challenge for leaders of congregations.
It absolutely is. It's a big challenge. I think it's baby steps. You're pushing against a lot of feelings. Some of the language I use around what you're bringing up is life versus longevity. We live kind of in a culture here. If you think about like your own health, right? We think of a culture that values longevity. Our goal medically, by and large, is to keep people alive as long as possible. This is a value that is present in our doctors and our medical system, and it's not bad. We as Christians, I think, kind of have a different view of what it means to be alive. And so kind of contrasting, you know, you guys have been with people who are sick, people who are in a difficult spot, and some of those people opt for longevity. And some of those people choose different treatments because they want to live. And I think having some conversations about what does it mean for the church to be living versus seeking its own longevity. So I've talked about that with some congregations a little bit, and again, it's kind of a complex idea, and not knowing your folks and your context, it's hard to say. But what you're naming is a very clear tension, and hopefully, what we can do is pull people back to this idea that like our congregations will persist or not persist, but they persist today. Right now, they are alive. Right now, there are people gathered here who want to do these things. Let's do these things. Let's be exactly who we are. Let's mean to do what we do, and let's follow Jesus. We're all responding to his call in our lives, and let's do that. And then let's see where we go. What we do know, and I think we have pretty good data to support, is that trying to grow our churches so they don't die is not a good strategy. Even though it feels like something we need to talk about. But I mean, yeah, this is hard. It's not easy, I think, to weave these things in. I put them in my elder training in my congregation as well. We spend time talking about these with all the new elders. So I just kind of try to weave it in, and yet it's not like we don't have these types of conversations. It's not a magic bullet, but it's just a kind of hopeful, you just kind of recenter. You just try to recenter constantly. Anything else you want to say about these?
Yeah, Philip, just I know we have a couple of people, Nancy and maybe Rick in Delhi. These are part of our they're in our book of order, that book that helps us understand what we do and how we do it. And specifically, this is in a section called the Foundations of Presbyterian Polity. So other denominations, United Methodist, congregational churches may have other, foundational statements. And what I think Philip is saying is, go back to those. Why do we exist, and why does our church happen? And so other denominations have those foundational statements. These are particular Presbyterians that go, as Philip mentioned, go back to way to 1910, that they keep showing up in our book of order for that long. So I just wanted to clarify for a few of those who may not be good Presbyterians.
This is something that I've made a note of, to go back to our church and to share again with the congregation these types of things. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Nancy.
That's great. And Greg, thanks for doing that. And if you guys from other denominations need me to do something, you just tell me to do it, I'll do it. So we kind of talked about this, but what I would encourage you to do, this is kind of an exercise again, as specifically as you can, choose one. And we aren't gonna do this now, but I think maybe if you want to do this exercise with people in your church, share or discuss how you reflected in your community, and do it as briefly as possible. I'm going to keep talking about brevity as we talk about communicating what we do, because you just don't have a lot of words to spend, whether or not you're putting it on a sign, on social media, whether or not you're talking to somebody who has come to church for the first time. Look at these. What's one that you think you do? How do you do it? 2 sentences. So that's kind of an exercise that you guys can do later on. All right, I'm going to move us along then. Great thoughts, you guys, about these. All right, so we've talked some about this. We've talked about longevity already. Let me shrink this down. As you know, your church is likely anxious, afraid. I think there's a touch of anger in most churches around decline. It's reflected in the way they think about evangelism, visitors, and church growth. Talked about this. We should focus on life, not longevity. I I haven't written about that, so I probably should at some point. I did preach a sermon to the presbytery here, the Presbytery of Arkansas, about it. You know, remember, we worship a living God, right? And so churches are called to shape our lives around that affirmation. And so kind of distinguishing about those things, I think is useful. We're not called to support, maintain, or sustain, support, or maintain an institution. The institution's a tool. So like the presbytery is a tool for us to do the work of the church. The congregation, the session, the budget, the building, these are tools that exist to do the work of the church. And I think sometimes, as we know, those tools become the mission. And that muddies the water, I think, quite significantly. I understand why they become the mission. I understand why people who've been sitting in those pews and in those spaces for 30, 40, 50 years really place a high value on those spaces and on those institutions, and they should. But trying to always recontextualize the work of the church in our theological roots and foundation, and not in the perpetuation of our institutions, I think is important. So anyway, any comments about this page? Okay, moving on. All right, some basics of hospitality. Now we'll do some practical things. I don't think any of these cost money. So congratulations. You're not going to spend a lot of money to do this stuff. First, a couple books to recommend. This is a book called Overflow. It's maybe 10 years old at this point. And forgive me if you guys are familiar with these. I'm just going to put them out there. So these are Methodists. We've got some Methodists on the Zoom, right? Woot, woot. Way to go. Yeah. You guys wrote a good book about worship attendance. There's a whole section in this book about Advent and about Advent visitors. I'm going to reference some of that. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of that here in a minute. But the whole book is about maximizing worship attendance. And I think it's really good, very practical, because we want people in worship, right? I mean, we like it and it's good and we believe it helps and we like to worship God. So we should want people in there. So Overflow, really good. Next book, Not Religious, The Art of Gathering, quite zeitgeisty at the moment, a book by Priya Parker. Some of you guys may be familiar with this. Sorry, the picture's a little pixelated. I think this book is amazing. I think there are all sorts of things that we can learn. Parker works with Fortune 500 companies. She worked in the Obama administration, simply trying to make gatherings as positive as possible. I've used some of her stuff in my work at the university as I've gotten kind of different groups together. But there's a lot of stuff in that book that can help any gathering. So even if it doesn't help your church, I have been informed that it really is good for baby showers by people that I've shared this book with. So, I mean, anytime you have a gathering, boy, if you had Priya Parker, she could put on a real whopper in terms of getting what you want. One thing I'll say, actually, is, well, whenever you have a gathering, what Parker says is the two questions you ask: who do you want to be there, and what do you want to accomplish? Is great. Like, you know, when you start sitting around, even outside of the Advent visitor conversations, when you start talking about like whatever you do during Advent, right? Like at our congregation, we have a women's luncheon that happens during Advent, and we have an all congregation brunch that happens during Advent. Simply asking those two questions, who do you want to be there and what do you want to happen, can help hone those things you already do. Because if there's specific people you want there, maybe putting something in the bulletin is not enough. Maybe those people need phone calls. Who are they? And what if they show up, what do you want to happen for them? You have to make that happen. And so those two questions: who do you want to be there? What do you want to accomplish? You can apply it to anything. The church is inherently a gathering. I think I read something about where two or more are gathered one time. So her stuff is great. Highly recommend it. Anyway, questions about those books or comments? I expect they're not news to some of you or all of you. I don't know. All right, on we go. Practical. All right, so this is from Overflow. So now we're into the easy, well, not easy. If it were easy, it would already be done. Make sure things are freshened and ready. Are the bathrooms clean and tidy? Is there visitor information in the pew racks? What about your work and witness do you want to highlight? This is the time to go through and make sure that what's in there is exactly what you want in the pews. Make sure that if you have folks visit, it's surprising how often you hear about bathrooms being important. Kid friendly. Many of us don't have a lot of children in worship, but they do. If they're going to show up, they show up around here. Do you have kids packs? Is there a changing table in both bathrooms? Is there childcare, and have you communicated that in some basic ways? On Christmas Eve, highlight something in January. Is there a mission project that's happening in January, a sermon series, an education event, a special church event? This is going to help if you have people come who aren't members of the church to think about why they might want to come back, and something that can stick with them as they go forward. Another idea that they shared in Overflow, and I thought this was great, and I think is really helpful, and we'll talk about, I think, the ways it's specifically helpful in a little while, is give away your offering. Oh man, there's a typo, not TP, to a local nonprofit. A lot of people think churches only want their money. We don't only want their money, and we care about our communities. And this is a great way to signal that, in the old show, don't tell sort of thing, to really show your community and your congregation and anybody that might show up that what you value are the people who live in your community, and you value them so much that you're going to turn over what might be one of your best offerings of the year to a nonprofit. I don't even know if you take an offering on Christmas Eve, but if you don't, this is a good thing to do. If you already take it and you use it to balance the budget, I mean, that's a conversation to have. But I think it's a conversation worth having. Any other kind of basic stuff that you guys want to say more about any of this? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Say more, share something that you do that's real basic and simple. There's stuff you already do that I'm sure is really good.
Yeah, PJ, again, Otigo. We have a tradition of a free will offering Christmas Eve service that goes to the local food pantry. We don't pass the plate. We just indicate where the baskets are, and folks can give as they can or feel moved.
That's great. Perfect.
And by the way, it's interesting, the typo, local food pantries often are in need of TP, so.
Right.
Yeah, Fleming, I was gonna say that's probably a typo from COVID days, which would be perfect, right? We had a local family had a house fire, farm family house fire just before Christmas one year, and I mentioned to the session that we should probably take up during our Christmas offering should go to that family, and then the church would match it, and we would give them whatever, And the one fellow said, "Well, a lot of people don't give on Christmas Eve because they don't have any money left." And I just looked at him and I said, "Then why are we here?"
Right. Yeah.
We're here. So they did it. He was very reluctant, but we did it. And we ended up, I think we gave them $500, which wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was something. So
yeah, that's great though.
Yeah.
In Portland, we have a weekly collection of food items that go to one of the local food pantries. But then during Advent, we supplement that with what we call the mitten tree, which we encourage people to bring in children's clothing, mittens, gloves, shirts, and we supplement that and in January distribute that among the local elementary schools to the nurses for use when there are children that come to their attention that need clothing.
That's great. Is the mitten tree in the sanctuary?
Yep, right there.
Perfect. And it's up on Christmas Eve?
Yep.
Perfect. Great. So, and that's something too, right? That you could come back and you could say on this Sunday in January, we're gonna share how this went. You know, just kind of a little thing. We're gonna give this information in the future. Other stuff on these, again, kind of basic, straightforward. Bathrooms, man. Can't underestimate the bathrooms. Tidy those suckers up.
Hey, Philip, I'm, you know, before I came here, I was serving a church in Texas and I wonder, is it, in your opinion, can we get names and addresses anymore from people that are visiting? In my experience, you know, in the last few years, you know, people aren't wanting to sign those pads and give them name and address. Anything. Any thoughts on whether that is helpful for in the future?
I think it's really tough. I don't think you're going to get many. And in terms of I would leave it to the individual congregations. You guys know yourselves better. My gut reaction is the juice isn't worth the squeeze, because you're going to have to produce those cards or have your ritual of friendship. You're going to have to put them out there. And then if you're going to ask people to give those, you need a plan to follow up. And you need a plan, and we're going to get to this later, for different types of visitors. And you need to have some idea of what type you're dealing with. And so I'm just not sure. You know, our congregation here in Fort Smith is doing relatively well at the moment, but we find now, Greg, when people walk into our building, they've already made up their mind because they've been consuming our materials online for weeks or months. And so this idea of kind of the cold calling type of visitor, I think that is declining too. So when those people come in, a lot of times they're ready to meet for coffee or they're ready to do something else anyway. So we're able to get some information, but that's because they already have made up their mind.
Great, thank you. And partly that means then perhaps, you know, on Facebook or on our websites or whatever, we are, you know, make sure that people know times and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
Other things? If you do have money in your congregation, I don't think you can spend enough to make your online offerings look as good as possible. I mean, I just feel like in terms of sharing what you do and who you are, I think it's just incredibly important. All right, on we go here. Hushing. All right, this is the article, the many mentioned article. So I don't know if some of you got this. This comes from The Guardian. It has absolutely nothing to do with church, but boy, when I read it, did I think of church. So anyway, I'm gonna diminish myself here and read some of this stuff to you. Okay, so hushing is the idea that stuff is loud. So my home needs hushing. An interiors idea that is making some noise at the moment. It's all about eliminating visual noise. Anything excessive, jarring, or inharmonious. Everything in your room has a voice, taking up visual, physical, and even emotional space, according to interiors blogger, I'm going to say Myquillan Smith. There went my light again. Dang it. You probably aren't even aware of it. A phenomenon often described in a perhaps unhelpful mixing of metaphors as house blindness, but the cumulative effect can be a jittery blast like avant-garde free jazz. My light went out. Come on, I got to move enough to get it going. Hold on. Timed out. Dang it. All right. That's all right. As long as you can see the screen, my face isn't very interesting anyway. Okay. So this summer, I visited one of my friends in Florida in a church down there. And it's a decent sized church. He has about 100 in worship on Sunday. And I walk in to the narthex through the main doors. And the sanctuary entrance is on my left. And then there's another one on the right. And all along the wall there on the right as I walk in, is the church's library. Now, let me ask you, who have been in churches for many, many years, do you believe that library was well maintained, ordered, and curated? Or do you believe that people, when they were finished with books, brought them to the church, put them in boxes underneath the shelves, and walked away? Let me ask, what do you think? You already know the answer, don't you?
The boxes appeared.
They don't take great care of returning books.
What'd you say?
We're going with they don't take good care.
They do not. No, it was a mess. So the first thing I saw as a visitor was this jumbled, overflowing mess of a library. Even if I'd been interested in a book, I wouldn't have known which one to choose. I would have wondered, are these donation, like, are these like free books? Can I just take them away? Like, what's happening here? And it was a mess. When I've walked into other churches, I walk in and right outside the sanctuary, there's like 8 weeks of bulletins stacked there. There's 3 months of newsletters. There's children's packs that clearly like haven't been touched and have just kind of been stuck in a corner in a kind of disheveled, unorganized way. We come into the sanctuary. Are the pew racks well maintained? Do they all have the information that the church wants to communicate in there, or are they jumbled? If I pull out a card to give my name and address or a pledge envelope, has it been colored on or scribbled on by a child? Has somebody written notes on it and put it back in the pew rack? Are my hymnals evenly distributed? When I look up at the chancel, what do I see? Do I see a lot of cords and cables running for the musicians or the lecterns? This is the stuff that I think, as I read this article, I just started thinking about churches. And we become eye blind in the same way you can become nose blind to odors. And it's not a great act of hospitality. Like, people are coming in there and we want their focus to be on worship. We want their focus to be on God and serving God and getting to know God and the people that are there. We don't want them to walk in and be like, man, this place is a mess, right? There's just these little like fake flowers, you guys know, right? Decluttering some of that stuff. And I'm not saying everything has to be austere, but just having some eyes to look around. I think this is a really, again, it's free. It just takes a little time, but is your space communicating what you intended to communicate with what's in that space? That's the question. So anyway, I think you'll have the article that this is based on. And again, it's about homes and interiors, but if you just take out home and insert church, you can have the same conversation if you want to share this with anybody in your congregation. But the idea of hushing everything. Anybody have questions? Am I off the mark? I'm betting I'm not. Anyway, okay. So a very simple thing we can do during Advent as we start thinking about visitors: hush our spaces. So anyway, I told you my story. Getting that critical eye to look around your facility. Again, I put bathrooms on there. Very important. And it's an act of hospitality. So I think we've covered that. All right. This is the final section for today. Anything you want to say about stuff we've done so far, thoughts you've had? Okay.
Bill, I'm thinking, Dave Johnson again, I'm thinking of your of experience with new eyes coming into that church environment. And we all get blind to and accustomed to the way our own nest is feathered. The Lutheran Synod in Pennsylvania, when I served down there, used to have a group of volunteers that would go around to various churches. And then after visiting their worship, would hand the pastor a few notes about things they had observed. Were the bathrooms clean? Could I find my way through the many pages of the bulletin? Did I know who Mary was, who would gladly, take our order for worship? And that was very helpful, I know, to the churches in that region at that time. New, fresh eyes coming in to look at your space.
Very useful. This is triggering something in my mind. I feel like there's a section on this in Overflow about basically having a secret shopper come to your church. All of us have I assume, friends who don't go to our church, I bet a lot of them would be willing to do what you're talking about and just come in, sit silent. They can even come and sit with you so they don't get accosted or whatever. But just look around and get those. That's great. Yes. Fresh eyes, because we do become blind to it, or we are like, well, that's annoying, but I know why it's there because having somebody else point it out and being like, they just noticed that. We probably should tidy that up. I think outside eyes are great. Other thoughts or things to share?
Doug Hatch. Doug
Yeah, sure.
Hatch, Marathon. I think the only complaint I've received in the last year from people who are attending church is about a month ago, somebody said, the candle on the right side burns faster than the candle on the left side,
Yeah.
and now they're not equal.
Uh-huh.
That's their observation.
Yeah. Right. It's funny what people notice and then are more than willing to share. But it is a good testimony to the ways that the aesthetics affect the space. That candle being uneven was enough to disrupt them. Is it enough to do anything about it? Boy, that's a subjective question. But it does testify to the challenge. That's great, though. The candles are uneven. Yes.
And it was sufficient to distract them enough.
That's right. They had to point it out. Yep.
A little OCD.
Yep. That reminds me of a phrase one of my friends in seminary had, that being in ministry is like being stoned to death with popcorn. Right? We all get that, right? Because I bet the service was good. I bet you guys sang your songs, and I bet you had a nice sermon, and I bet people were warm and friendly to each other. Doesn't matter. Candles were uneven. Good stuff. Other things to share? Okay, you guys. So what I thought we would do is we would have some case studies, because not all visitors are the same. So I came up with 4 types. And this gets back to that idea of who do you want to be there and what do you want to happen, right? So what I think with these different types of visitors, it's important to have a conversation in your congregations of like, what are we doing to tell the story to each of these types of folks? What are we doing to communicate to them? And how are we serving Jesus and how we interact? Because they're all different. So let's get going. And I think they'll be familiar to you. Our first, let's see, this is just a recap. So I've already said that. We're going to skip. All right. So these are the out-of-towners, our first visitors. Margaret Smith's, another typo, sorry. Margaret Smith's family attends every Christmas. They fill an entire pew. Her adult children are awash in the glow of nostalgia. Her grandkids are largely disinterested and seem bored. You will not see them again until next year. Do you recognize this family? Yeah, right.
They're sprinkled throughout the whole service, the whole Christmas Eve service. There are little pockets of them all over the church.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. And we tend not to think about them so much because they're not like real visitors, right? Like they're not going to join the church. But we should think about them because they live in towns with churches. Do they go to churches? Is this their only time in worship all year? We're communicating the gospel to these folks. So how might we, what can we do of things we've talked about or things that we haven't? What can we do to consider these visitors that we'll have during Advent and Christmas?
Can you say that again, please?
Yeah, sure.
What
can we do to consider these visitors during Advent and Christmas? Like, what's a specific tactic for helping to communicate the gospel to these folks and considering them when we consider visitors? It's tough, right? It's not easy. One of the things that I think is targeted at this group in particular is it's the mitten tree, right? It's the giving away our money to the family that had a house fire. I think disconnecting, even if all we do for those grandkids who are like 13 and 18, if all we do is communicate to them that we don't care about their money and we care about our neighbors, we get one bite at the apple and that's the bite we take. Like, that's a pretty good thing to communicate. Those types of tactics, I think, are disproportionately about this type of visitor, right? We want them to go back to their home someday. Hopefully they'll have a thought, should I go to church? Or somebody will say to them, do you want to come with me to worship? And what we do on Christmas Eve will inform that decision that they make. And even though they're only in church that one time, I mean, there's still plenty of Christians in America at some point. Or somebody's going to say something and they're going to be like, you know, I went to my grandma's church when I was a kid and it was really nice. And they always gave their money to the food pantry. They didn't care about my money. Anyway, anything else you guys want to say about this particular visitor?
I'm not sure about the 18-year-old grandkids, but certainly having a quality children's message for the younger ones.
Yep.
And maybe engaging the older ones in some way.
Yep.
So they're not totally just observers.
Yep.
But also, since a lot of us now are recording and broadcasting our services, you have an opportunity, if you make an impression, it's a positive one, to have people, when they return to where they live, to continue to interact with you digitally.
Right. So that's a great point. And so then, you know, making sure that you're clearly communicating how to find your stuff online, right? Because if they do, that's perfect. Because if they have a great Christmas Eve, maybe a week or two later, they think to themselves, you know what, I'm going to get on YouTube and watch this. But you gotta put that information directly inside their heads. That's a great point. Other stuff?
If you have a interactive service, a skit or something of that sort happening, sometimes asking the older kids to help shepherd, let's say the younger kids in a skit or something like that, ask them to do a job is a way to engage them. Often I found that while it's a tougher sell with males, it's a sometimes effective way to engage teenage girls. Give them a job.
Right. Yeah. Give them a job. And this is something you can think about ahead of time, right? Margaret's family always attends in my model. You know they're coming, or you at least suspect they are. You can ask ahead of time, hey, would your granddaughter like to help with the play? You know, probably she will tell her grandmother yes. That's how grandmothers work.
Grandmothers have power.
So that's a great thing. And it makes her feel valued and special. It gets her in front of the congregation. That's great. Really good. You know, this one especially, this is kingdom work, right? Like, this is planting seeds. We're not going to sit under the branches of this tree probably, but it's kingdom work. All right, I'm going to move us along to our next one. Those were great thoughts. Our next model, the Creasters and casual members. Ed and Sally have been members since the 1980s. They used to attend regularly, but now that their kids are grown, they haven't been seen regularly in many years. They still show up every Christmas and Easter and throw $100 in the offering plate. Sally says, we are going to get back into church regularly after Christmas. We miss everyone. She says this every year.
Pretty much.
Right? So, all right, this is group number 2, your Creaster people. These people aren't they're engaged enough to care to come a couple times a year. They're even in this case engaged enough to want to imagine that they'll be there more. So there's at least some desire to re-engage or be more present throughout the year. What are we thinking here? This is a hard group, I have to say. I think this is the hardest group to think about.
Doug Hatch Marathon.
Yes,
Might
sir.
this be the opportunity for a home visitation?
Yes. It might be a good opportunity after Sally says we're going to be back in church regularly to say, great, can I swing by or can we meet up for coffee? Yep. Good one.
Or invite her to participate in some of the mission programs in the church and gradually work in this Sunday morning attendance.
Yep. Good. Follow up. If she says it, she's inviting the follow up. Perfect. Peter.
Yeah, at Otigo, particularly during COVID, we moved our service, and we do this during the winter as well, from the sanctuary to our fellowship hall when the numbers are low or the heating bills are high. But moving the piano and moving some of the accessories from the sanctuary over to the house takes some younger backs. And so we basically reach out to our casual members to help with projects like that, spring cleanup, gardening, projects that they can plan and show up. And it's not only a very productive time, but it's a great time of fellowship and just catching up on life's news.
That's great, Peter. And I think helping around the church is really good. Remember, what we want to do too, we want to remind them that they're not just serving an institution. So if you invite to like help migrate from the sanctuary to the fellowship hall, then the next invitation should be like, help us do this in the community, right? Or something like that. You want to balance that out for them because that's going to be a different type of experience too for them. But that's perfect. Great. Put them to work. At least get some value, even if they're not going to come to church, right? Move the piano. Other stuff on this group? All right. I bet Ed and Sally have friends in the congregation who come more regularly than they do. So that's another thing. You can say, hey, what's been up with Ed and Sally? Should I call them? You know, anything going on with their lives? You know. All right, on we go. Here it is. The curious neighbors. You don't know the name of this couple. They sneak in the back of the sanctuary and don't speak to anyone. Their clothing suggests they may not be from the same socioeconomic level as most of the congregation. You recognize them as people who take things from the blessing box outside your church. This means they live in the neighborhood. What do we think of this group? Most of our congregations, I would assume, aren't overly represented. Maybe in the small towns they are, but in larger areas, we're probably traveling to get to our congregations and not that many folks from the neighborhood are in worship. But this is a couple that has taken advantage of your mission programs or your engagement with the community, and they decided to show up on Christmas Eve. And they're going to feel and look out of place. Have you guys ever had anybody like this? Because I think this is less common than the other two that we've looked at so far.
We get a number at Cortland. We're a city church, so we get drop-ins from the area. Some are homeless. Some are connected to SUNY Cortland College. Some are just traveling through the area and stay at one of the nearby motels and see our building next to the courthouse and come for worship. So we get a lot of curious people or one-time visitors that come in quietly and leave quickly, and pretty hard to make contact with them, and definitely will not fill out a card.
Yeah, right. So we know this. We know this group is going to get in and out fast. They may even leave during the last hymn. And we know they're not going to fill out a card. So personal contact is going to be difficult. So what are ways that we can communicate to them without, or consider them without speaking directly to them?
We have some people who have visited our church in the same way, because we have a thrift store at our church. Our service ends with a passing of the peace rather than in the service. It's at the very end of the service. And so often we're able to catch those people right at the end and make a small connection anyways. So we don't often see them back, but at least there's a little bit of a connection made there.
Yep, that's great. You know, again, you're just planting the seeds. These are people, they came for a reason. And most of these folks, like, we all know the people that come to church and then wait around to talk to the pastor afterwards so they can ask for money. This is not these people. These people just want to slip in and slip out. Why'd they come? Why'd they choose your congregation? These are to me interesting questions that I would like to know more. I always would, when they sneak in and sneak out of my own church. I don't have any great strategies here, but I think this is one of those areas too where creating that culture of hospitality in your congregation, this is where the rubber hits the road, because they're not going to look like everybody else, and they're not going to talk like everybody else, and they're going to be intimidated.
I have a suggestion.
Yes.
Just came, Deb Fleming, Cabin Hill. Is there a way you could designate someone in the congregation when they lay eyes on these folks to have like a card and a pen where you could get just their mailing address and maybe like send them a thinking of you card like a couple times a year?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you connect it, if you tell them what's happening, right? Like, we like to do a card ministry. Like, we have members who like to send cards. Can we send you a card? Like, if you connect it clearly, that may be the way to go on something like that.
Doesn't mean anything's ever going to come of it, but at least you've touched base with them and you've said that, you know, you're thinking about them, which you probably are, because they came in sanctuary during the worship service. Yeah.
You know, and you're clearly thinking about them because they connected to your church through one of your mission programs in my little world scenario.
Yeah, and you're not putting pressure on them to want any more information from them or details about their lives. You just want to be able to say that you're thinking about them.
And it also, like, if you realize, okay, this is from our community. So in my model, right, they came in through the blessing box. So for this congregation, that's the only thing they really do. It's a small church in my mind. That means that it may be useful to have more information about your congregation in the blessing box.
Yeah, say we do that. We don't. Yeah.
Sometimes there's a denominational advantage. About twice a year, people, because my church is close to a major interstate, people on Sunday morning doing their driving, maybe they're going from Thousand Islands down to somewhere else. It's about the time where they've had their breakfast, but they know they want to do a church service.
Mm-hmm.
And the Presbyterian, the timing is just right when they're driving into town. And they're just passing by, but they're committed enough at their home church to know they need that time of meditation and courage and reinforcement and just a spiritual event. And then they're just passing on because they're heading down towards North or South Carolina or Florida. But that's the advantage of being close to a major interstate, is occasionally you get the curious, but they're not neighbors.
Yeah.
They know they want something and they're willing to participate for an hour and maybe afterwards share a little bit of their story about why they're traveling from A to B. But we know we're not going to see them again unless they do the same traveling a couple of years in a row.
Right. And so this gets back, that exact example gets back to what we're trying to do here. We're doing kingdom work, right? How you greet them is going to be reflective of the life versus longevity perspective of the congregation. From a longevity perspective, those people have no value to you unless they put money in the offering plate on the one Sunday they come to your church. From the life perspective, from the church lives a certain way to spread the gospel, to share joy, to shelter, nurture, offer spiritual fellowship, they have tremendous value because they are pilgrims, they are passing through, and they are worshiping with your congregation. So it's a culture and theology test for that type of group as much as anything else. And it's why I think it's important to first talk about what we're trying to do before we start thinking about who's coming, because that's a great example. So the way that your church has developed culture around those folks is reflective of that good theology.
This is Karen. This is Karen from the Nichols Presbyterian Church. And this more specifically is for the Christmas Eve candlelight service. But because we know we always get a lot of people who drop in. But we have 2 greeters at the door, which we don't normally have on a normal Sunday. And we'll give them the bulletin and the candle for the candlelight service and can greet them there. So they already get the friendliness of the church before they even get in the sanctuary. You know, we greet them in the narthex. And I think that really helps them out a lot. And
yeah, greeting is super important, and just setting that tone right when they walk in the door that they're valued and welcomed is great. All right, I got 2 more, I think, to share with you. So we're moving on from our curious neighbors, church shoppers. Here we go. The gold standard. When we dream of Advent visitors, we dream of these folks. They're a couple with 2 small children. They're new to town. They show up Christmas Eve and settle comfortably into a pew. Everyone seated around them who attends regularly is aware of their presence because they know they aren't a family to an active member. They are real visitors. Right? This is the one everybody's thinking of, but we can't lose our minds just because they have come into our church on a Christmas Eve. We gotta make sure that we're being authentic to who we are and who we worship. So let's talk about these folks for just a minute. What do you have to say?
Doug Hatch Marathon.
Yes, sir.
I had an elder many years ago that a new family moved into town and attended church. And before they left the worship service, he had said, if you become a member, you probably can get on session.
Oh, gosh.
No.
Yeah, right?
I mean, the play of, you want power? Stay around.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I
hilarious.
think that takes them away, though.
It does. It probably did. You know, and this idea that people just swarm, I think is kind of, I understand why people do it, but it's like, let's chill, you guys. Let's just relax. They're just here. They're worshiping. Let's be friendly and hospitable, but we don't need to like swarm.
this
You know,
is Karen.
Yes.
Oh, this is Karen from Nichols Presbyterian. Just in September, our next door neighbors to the church sold their house. So now we have new neighbors, and they only came from the town like 10 or 12 miles away. So we thought, oh, maybe they'll continue going on to their church that they went to there, but maybe they never went to church. So our first interaction with them has been, we made a plate of cookies and took it over to them and said, welcome to the neighborhood. And, you know, we're just gradually getting into it and see if we can get them to come, because we want them to know that we value them as people and neighbors and not just numbers.
Right. Perfect. Yep. They're human beings, children of God. That's great. Anything else to say about this group?
The challenge is, will they share information with you?
Yeah.
Can you follow up with them? And some are that are church shopping, want to continue not to to be unknown at this point until they make a decision. So,
Yep.
you know, if they will share information with you, then you can follow up in a variety of ways with a welcome packet, information, a visit, a phone call. But if they don't share the information with you, your hands are tied, and you certainly don't want to swarm them.
No, you don't want to swarm them, and they're unlikely to share that information on a first visit, right? Unless they're moving into your town from the Presbyterian church that they were part of in the other town, they're unlikely to give that to you. So you want to make sure that when you get that, you don't want to force it. You don't want to try to pressure them into giving that information. You don't want to do anything that's going to create uncertainty in their minds that they're going to have somebody showing up at their house later. People tend to not like that much anymore. Or, you know, when I first started, we were supposed to visit people. This was 20 years ago. We were supposed to take people bread on Sunday afternoon, and they would fill out their cards and they would throw them in the offering plate. I think, as Greg pointed out, I think that's kind of done, that era. So yeah, you want to be real careful with how you approach the information. You probably aren't going to get information from this particular model. But anyway, Peter, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I would reverse that strategy and give that person or that family your name and telephone number, maybe on a blank business card, and say, gee, you know, if you need a little bit of insider insight on where to shop, where to find a pediatrician, that kind of day-to-day living stuff, if they're just starting to settle in, and be of service to them, and just be there, kind of the Chauncey Cross approach to things. Just be there for them, be a contact, and be willing to say, you know, I don't know, let me check and I'll get back to you. Be their advocate. And I'd say if you did a good job, you stand a 50-50 chance of them coming back to take a second look.
Yeah, so just be helpful, right? That's a good way to think about it. You know, the servant model is pervasive in scripture. I think there's just a big expectation of when people come into a church, the church is going to be about what they can do for the church. And really I think that's a great way to think about it. Let's do the opposite, son. It's great. All right, last one. This is important. I think this is happening more. Okay. So this is Christmas Eve. This is an older couple, but of course they're young to us because they're in their mid-50s. They show up this 2 Sundays prior to Christmas Eve. Then again that night, you find out a little about them. They have left the Southern Baptist congregation down the road. I don't know if you guys have Southern Baptists up there, but I gave them to you because it has simply become too conservative. They decided, however, they weren't ready to give up on church itself, so they're trying your congregation. So where I live, there is motion from conservative evangelical congregations into other churches, and this is a type of visitor that I would strongly consider you putting some thought into. And maybe it's not as big of a deal in New York. I just don't know what the culture of your communities are in terms of I mean, people just may leave the church when they get tired of whatever congregation they've been going to. But certainly where I live, this is a big one. And this Christmas, I expect there's going to be people who are going to be out trying new congregations who are actively fleeing from congregations that just keep getting more and more conservative. So first of all, does this resonate at all with you guys? Not really?
Yeah, we're not where we are.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful to know. We don't need to spend a ton of time on it then.
But we have quite a few disaffected Catholic, not members, but regular attendees.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Roman Catholicism may be a little more practical as well. They're going to like the liturgy probably that we offer. The trouble with those pesky Roman Catholics is they've been convinced that it's either all or nothing with the Roman Catholics. Anyway, All right. Well, this is just something to put out there. If I don't know, it may not be relevant, but I wanted to share it with you anyway. Any others? Did we miss anybody? Any other archetypes of visitors that we didn't cover that you've got or thought about or had?
Yeah. We have college student population in Binghamton.
Okay.
I'm sure Portland does too, and maybe Delhi as well.
Do you have international students that stay on campus over Christmas?
I made a note to look into that.
We might.
Yeah, because that may be something to specifically put some thought into.
What we have local to us is that the college campus itself is a good 4 or 5 miles away, but the downtown center is 2 blocks from here, and the student housing around our area has exploded in the last decade.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of students just around downtown.
Mhm.
And
So
because they're not on campus students,
Yep.
they, they're not tied to a dorm schedule.
And those guys, probably by and large, they're not showing up on a Sunday morning.
No, they do. We get an
Do they?
occasional pop in. So
Okay. I would seriously think about doing something in the evening. If you want to do something for those guys. And if you have somebody who pops in, you may ask them, what they like. But yeah, that's college students is certainly one to think about. And I would think about international students. Others that we missed? All right. That's what I got. And it's for you guys, it's getting close to lunch. So anyway, anything else I can do for you or help you with in any way? Or do you just want to share with the rest of the group?
Oh, I've got a dilemma.
Oh yeah, let's go.
We've had a young man bring a baby, and we were like, "Yay, a guy and a little baby! This is great!" At Cabin Hill, and he occasionally goes to Andy's, which is later. It's our service is 9:30, theirs is 11, and the 2 churches, Cabin Hill and Andy's, share an organist. So Jim comes and does our service, and then he goes down the road. Or up the mountain, down the mountain. I don't know. Anyway, and Karen and I, Karen is a Methodist lay pastor, and she's serving the Andes Presbyterian Church, and I'm serving Cabin Hill, and our contracts are the same, so we switch off our days off, and we cover for each other, right? So anyway, this depending on the morning, this fellow shows up with the baby, and of course everybody was thrilled that there was a young guy coming in, a baby, and this is great. And he did say at one time that, he hoped that she's, he's trying to keep her quiet and whatever. She was little at the time. And we said, oh no, it's a baby. We're thrilled to have her. And, if she makes noise, that's fine. And if she gets away, that's okay. Well, then she became actually mobile.
Yep.
But he's not able to keep her reined in. And it's distracting to the congregation. You were there for Sunday at Cabin Hill? Were you there?
Yeah.
You remember her going up and down the aisle and stuff? I
Yeah.
mean, to the point where she's coming up and grabbing at the candles and just being, and he can't seem to contain her. And when he tries, she just screams. And so it's very difficult. And it's proven difficult in both churches, depending on which Sunday he shows up with her. And so Andy's is working on a way to approach him about it. And Cabin Hill is behind them 100%. They just took it to the session and decided they would talk about it and discuss it with him. I don't know what they're going to say or how they're going to handle it, but if we're open to any suggestions anybody might have.
We have teenagers in our church that do the same thing.
Yeah, I know, we do, yes. Yes, but this is even more distracting, but yeah. So
I think 2 things for me. One is I think getting to that idea of like servant, right? Like that was brought up earlier. Like approaching it with how can we help you? He clearly wants to be in worship.
Yes,
Y-
and
y-
he's got a lovely voice.
Right,
So,
and
yeah.
he clearly doesn't know what to do.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
you guys, I assume, aren't offering nursery care.
No, neither church has, and has any of that because she's the only little body there. So,
Right.
you know.
So it may be that she gets her own nursery worker. I don't know, but you may ask what he needs and start from there. But also, I mean, like, this is always the price, right? Like, that's a young family. That's what everybody says they want. We want you. Okay, well, now you have one. So
Be careful what you ask for.
right, they're not going to behave in the same way that your settled congregation behaves. There's not. And so that's a conversation to have at the session level, is like, because one pathway here leads to him being alienated and not coming back, and you've solved the problem.
That's what we're afraid of. We don't want that to happen.
Right. Yeah. You don't want that. So I think asking him how can he be helped and served to maximize his worship experience. And then when she's a little older, the congregation is going to help her get used to it.
Right. Right.
So do you have anything in the sanctuary that are quiet toys, that like a toy area where he could worship and have some
toy area, but we've brought in some things and we've sort of let him set it up for her, but she just does not stay there. She looks at something and she's gone. I mean, we can contain that little area that she's in, but she's on fire on a Sunday morning. Literally, she's like somebody lit a match under her. She will not stay put for more. When she was little, he could slip a bottle in her mouth, and she would remain quiet for about 10 minutes. But it's distracting when you're trying to preach, and the congregation is elderly and they don't hear well. So when you have, that extra noise, and we don't want to discourage, we don't want him to not come back, and we want her to grow into the church. And
we have the same problem with a couple of teenagers in our church.
Really should be old enough to.
They are constantly making noise, constantly getting up, moving around, going out, coming back in.
Yeah.
And it's a very touchy situation because the father does not come to church and will not come to church.
Right.
But the mother comes every other weekend because she works.
She's a nurse.
She's a nurse. And so she can only come every other weekend.
Sure.
But I don't want to lose her or them, actually.
They do a lot.
They do a lot for the church. But it's very difficult for a lot of the church members. I can kind of shut it out, but the church members can't.
No.
This is Karen from the Nichols Presbyterian. One thing for the teenagers is maybe they could help with part of the worship service. Maybe they would be okay with reading something, or I'm not sure exactly what your program is, but you have them participate and have a certain part of the worship that they do. The thing for the small children is sadly, we don't have small children that come only on Easter or Christmas, but we have what's called a cry room, and it's right off the sanctuary. It has a big picture window so that the parents or whoever are in there can look into the sanctuary, and we have speakers set up so they can hear the worship service, but we can't hear them. And I don't know if either of your buildings have that option of a small room or not, but that's what we've done.
Yeah, no. Not really.
Just a note also about a nursery worker. You'll need two. You really shouldn't have one. You need two for appropriate coverage and safety. They can't just put one worker with one child.
Right.
In a private place.
Right.
And when you've only got a handful of members, then that makes it a little difficult to do that.
Right. Oh, well, we've only got 8 in worship. You take 2 of them away.
That's right.
I still count them. They're there.
They're there.
All right. That's
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you for being with us and your words and thoughts. And thank you all for being here. I wanted to thank Scott Kindig, who is at Binghamton United, and Bruce Gillette, who is not here. They actually had a funeral they were going to out of town, so they weren't going to be able to be here. But they, Bruce and Scott and I, and Peter, thanks to Peter for helping to plan these 4 small church initiative workshops. We have another one coming in a couple weeks on the 28th of October. And this one's about the lectionary. And so Alan Presby, one of our pastors in our presbytery, is going to look at the Advent lectionary passages and kind of look, how can we manage through that those passages and preaching. So it may sound like it's just for pastors and lay pastors and those who are preaching, but it may be good for you all to come and hear what we pastors do as we prepare for our sermons. Maybe you'll even learn the exegesis word, and we'll hear a little more about that in that workshop. So that's the 28th at 10 o'clock. Then there's another one. The last one is coming in on a Thursday evening in November, the 16th at 7 o'clock. So keep your eyes out if you're not getting Thursday thoughts. That's a wonderful way to understand what's going on in our presbytery, but also understand and get the information about these small church initiative workshops. Thank you again, Philip, for being here. Any final comments from anyone? Well, again, thank you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace now and always. Amen.
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 Thanks,
Bye,
friends.
everybody.
Thank you, Philip.
Good to see you all.
Close this out, Rickster.
Okay.